Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled that you could join us today for what we promise to be a stimulating, maybe slightly horrifying, slightly disconcerting, but hopefully inspirational conversation about some of the issues related to misinformation in our society, which I think all of you will agree with us that it has certainly become a prevalent problem. Actually, it's one that's been with us for a very long time. It just seems like it's gaining a lot more traction, and our understanding of what this problem is and how we might be able to address it as conscientious and responsible news consumers, I think will go a long way toward helping move us all forward as we move forward into this election and then certainly beyond. I am thrilled to welcome our panelists who are here from the School of Communication. I would like to first introduce my very good friend, Jeffrey Trimble, who is here. Jeff is an international journalist, editor, and media manager. He was for more than 35 years. He came to Ohio State. Actually, he says he came, but he came back to Ohio State in 2018 as a lecturer. He got both of his degrees, a bachelor's degree and a master's degree here. And he is working in the School of Com and also in the School of Political Science. He served most recently as the Deputy Director of Broadcast's Board of Governors, the U.S. government agency that oversees all U.S.-funded non-military international broadcasting, and that includes the Voice of America. He also worked for U.S. News and World Report magazine for 15 years. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Nicole. Good to be with you.
I would also like to introduce my good friend and student, Max Garrison, who is a third year studying journalism and public policy at Ohio State. He is the campus editor for The Lantern. Welcome, Max.
Thank you. Hi.
And last but never least is Spencer Hunt, who's the advisor for The Lantern and a journalism lecturer here at Ohio State. He previously spent more than 20 years as a reporter in Illinois and Ohio, including at the Cincinnati Enquirer and the Columbus Dispatch. Welcome, Spencer.
Glad to be here.
So this is a conversation, everyone who's here. It's a conversation, obviously, between these three extraordinary people, but also with you. So we desperately want your questions. We want you to contribute to this and allow us to kind of talk through some of the issues that have been most interesting or disconcerting for you. But we're going to get us started, and I'm going to put Jeff on the spot quickly, and I'm going to ask him. You know, we hear this term fake news, and you and I have had the privilege. I've had the privilege of having several talks with you about this, and I think you and I both agree that there is no such thing as fake news. News by itself is truth, but, or it's the best, as Bob Woodward once put, it's the best obtainable version of the truth. But we do have a climate of misinformation, malinformation. There's a variety of things that we could talk about. I'd like you to walk us through what are the big issues that we're dealing with when it comes to falsehoods being disseminated to the public.
Yeah, boy, I wish I could redo the graphic to open the presentation today. I'd cross out the word fake news if I could, so you could still see it. I think we need to figure out how to use this term as little as possible. Once upon a time, it actually did mean something back in the 1990s. Fake news was sensational, made up false stories, usually for some commercial reason. I mean, think of standing in a supermarket line and seeing the National Enquirer with stories about two-headed aliens or something like that. It was a way to attract audiences to for some purpose. And then it became parody and satire, right? The Daily Show, the Colbert Report, we talked about fake news. The problem today is the meaning's been co-opted, and in particular by a leading American political figure. And I think we all know who I'm describing here. And it's used just to denigrate stories and facts that a politician or another figure simply doesn't like, or who finds them inconvenient. So it's used as shorthand to label unfavorable news as false, rather than to describe genuinely inaccurate information. So just two terms I would say that I think are more useful way to talk about this phenomenon. You've mentioned a couple of them. One is the word disinformation. So disinformation is the deliberate spreading of false or misleading information in order to influence opinion or obscure the truth. It's a lie, folks. It's something that's been made up to convince you of something. Misinformation, which often is used interchangeably with disinformation, but let's try to make a distinction. Misinformation is false information that is spread whether or not there's an intent to mislead. So I would submit that everybody on this webinar is guilty of misinformation, of passing along a news story, a social media posting that is inaccurate. You may not know it's inaccurate, but you're not doing it to further that particular aim. You haven't made it up. So just a little distinction in terms there that I think set the context for us to have a more more informed conversation about what all this means.
Spencer, we as people who teach journalists, I think that we believe that we are teaching them to do their jobs well, but that doesn't stop them from facing the same accusations as mainstream media, which is that they're presenting falsehoods as truth. And I think it's this culture that we've developed. And Jeff mentioned that our current administration uses the term fake news when it's things that we disagree with. But I think we see it from a lot of people using the term fake news, or it's disinformation when it's things that don't fit within the realm of their own reality. How do you work with that in terms of working with the Lantern staff?
Well, I think, you have to be clear and transparent about the information that you're sharing, where it came from, and rely on the facts at hand. And so, just because people don't like the facts doesn't change that they are the facts. So, for me, when there is pushback on a story, or people saying that this isn't true, what we do is we show how it is. And it's a pretty straightforward process. Now, what's discouraging is I think we have a climate where people feel enabled to just not believe you, regardless of what it is that you're reporting. And so at some point, you really have to, just say, okay, here it is, and that's it. Um, and so as things continue to develop, and things continue to evolve, then eventually people do come to a consensus as to what are the facts. But I think we do have an environment now where people are encouraged to believe what it is that they want.
And Max, I think you've had some recent occurrences where that has come to the forefront of your coverage. So as someone who's, relatively new into your journalism career, what's your take on the idea of this misinformation, malinformation, and how it's affecting the way that you report right now?
Well, I think like in the college community in particular, um, most of us grew up with social media and didn't grow up with what previous generations had, with just like, daily newspapers and having the institutions where you grow up getting your news that you just trust through the institution. And so we grew up getting our news on social media, and I think we grew up questioning more. And so we're kind of seeing this play out now, or how I'm kind of seeing this play out now, is that, for example, the recent murder of a student on campus, and rumors going around of possible retaliation to witnesses and everything that weren't substantiated, even though we were reporting on that and reporting that police hadn't substantiated any of those claims, and that some of the footage coming out of drive-by shootings weren't actually even in the Columbus area. We are being questioned, and realizing that we need to be need to be as transparent as possible, just so our readership, who is more questioning than the Lantern's previous readerships, trusted us there.
Absolutely. So, we actually, we had the privilege of soliciting some questions before we started this. And one of them, Jeff, I'd like to open it up to all of you, but Jeff, I was hoping you'd start. And the question is, why is it that we've never heard of fake news before the 2016 election? And, Dwight is with us today, and he mentioned, fake news is nothing new. Particularly in presidential races. He cites the 1800 election and the misleading information about Jefferson, or the accusation against Grover Cleveland and the child that he had out of wedlock. What has changed, within the last, let's give it 5 years? What has shifted us on our axis that fake news has become such a prevalent term, and that disinformation has become so prevalently dispensed?
Well, the quick answer on why it's become such a prevalent term is because President Trump has pushed it so hard. And it has resonated not only throughout the United States, but around the world. And here I'd like to cite a very specific outcome, which is very unfortunate and I would say dangerous. And that is that since 2016, about 30 countries around the world have passed fake news laws that punish people for putting out fake news. In fact, this is a tool that governments are using to repress free speech. So fake news and that term is having global resonance. The reason it's more of a problem than it's ever been, and sure, disinformation, fake news has been around forever. Sun Tzu wrote about it in The Art of War in the 5th century BC. What's different is that in the 20th century, given the speed of communication, the rapidity with which the information spreads, it gets around a lot more quickly. Second, in the 20th century, we still mostly were consuming media news from a specific set of sources, mass media outlets. Today, people curate their own news experiences. And this tends to encourage and have them encounter perspectives that they already agree with. And this is fertile ground for the quicker spread of disinformation and fake news. You know, it was Mark Twain who said, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth puts its boots on. If he said that, that might be disinformation. And today, I think we say that it's going to get around the world 20 times before the truth can get its boots on. And just one final quick point. A key aim of disinformation, the old days we talked about propaganda. That was trying to convince you of something I wanted you to believe and do. And there's an element of that in disinformation, but a really significant component of disinformation is creating chaos, where you don't know what to believe and where you can't discern the truth because there's so much busy stuff out there that the truth may even be there somewhere. You just can't find it.
Question about that. You know, we have a great, Stephanie brings up a great point here that we have to delve into, and that's social media. I mean, you know, when we look at the rise of social media, you know, figure in the last 10 years, certainly the rise of Twitter, you know, Facebook became much more prevalent in this time period. We have many more pathways, you know, and Spencer, going along with social media, I think we have this blurring of the lines of what publishers are. So in the past, we understood the content creators were the ones who published information, but now, you know, the publishing world is blown up by anyone can be a publisher. So how do we combat this kind of social media maelstrom that's causing a hurricane of misinformation to hit us all the time?
I don't know that there's a solid answer to that question yet, and that's the problem, really. I was just thinking of some of the things that Jeff was talking about, and you know, I used to cover politics in Illinois, and it wasn't that long ago that if someone was going to spread a nasty rumor or an outright lie about a candidate, it would be something that would appear in one of these secretive mailers, right, that would show up at everybody's houses, and it would just be on this piece of paper. And if you were a newspaper reporter, you may not even report on it because that would give it some sort of platform. But now everybody's got a platform, and we're all tuning into whatever it is that we want to hear. The main difference that I think that people need to be looking for when there's information that's targeting them that they might believe in that's false, and there's information out there that's true, is to look deeper into the story and the sourcing and see where is it that these facts are coming from. A solidly written piece of journalism or displayed, you know, video journalism or a podcast will include information and attribution to facts, right? And we will give you the sources that this information came from. I was thinking just now about, there was something that came out recently. It was a tweet from, I think, a national pundit about we were losing mail-in ballots or something. Mail-in ballots are being destroyed on campus. And it referred to a publication at Ohio State that we looked and it didn't even exist. I can't even remember the name of it now. And so there are a couple of steps that people can take to find out if something that's fake, and they can do it pretty easily. The question is, you know, how are they motivated to do that? And so how do we then get across that truthful information to them to say, no, that's fake, right? Yeah.
Well,
Nicole, could I kick in a couple of other just real quick points about social media? Remember that the algorithms that run in the background of social media reward inflammatory content with amplification. They want to stimulate you. They want to stimulate your emotions so that you take an action. It could be commercial, buy something, right? Truth does not come into that equation, nor does the sincerity of the message or the messenger. That's not a part of it. So that's part number one. Part number two, we feel very free on social media. We can express ourselves to our heart's content. But you have to understand that every time you express yourself on social media, that's transmuted into data. That data is sold to brokers. That information goes on to political forces, foreign governments, and others that will use your speech to target you with customized messages just to you personally, without you ever knowing or understanding why or even how you're being influenced. So that's how deep the problem is, given the way social media is organized.
Well, Max, how do you think it's affecting, the population of students, especially considering their reliance on social media to get news? And invariably, when I ask students, where do you get your news from? The majority of them tell me it's social media. But when I ask them who produces it, they'll tell me Twitter or Facebook, and not really understanding that there's different entities that are out there manipulating the messages in order to make sure they get to you.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes back to just a lot of that comes back to what I was saying earlier about how that's just kind of what we always knew. Like, we didn't really know newspapers as much, or necessarily watch evening news with our parents as much.
But how do we combat? I mean, how do you make discerning decisions as a student, as someone whose news consumption comes almost exclusively from social media?
I think a lot of that has to come with just like deciding who, like on the individual level, deciding who you follow to let into your feeds. And also that comes on parts of like news organizations. And one thing that we've been talking more about doing, especially with our election coverage coming up this week, is how do we move more of this to social media away from just our website? And I think the large part of combating that is just accepting that there's going to be less print or strictly video, that you're trying to bring people into your website and getting the information and just kind of like the short blurbs that people are being, or that our generation is accustomed to working with.
I hear you. So
Yeah.
Jeff, Elizabeth's asking, and I think it's a great point. And I also, I often note there's really not that many people on Twitter in the scheme of life. But then the media will pick up like one of a tweet that, let's say, I don't mean to single out Donald Trump, but he tweets quite a bit. But they'll then amplify the message that goes out in a tweet that's inaccurate, even though they're saying this is what he tweeted. It may not be accurate. And so Elizabeth's asking if there's a majority of Americans who believe fake news, or it's a noisy minority.
It's a really great question. So we know that about 25% of Americans, and this is true of most countries in the world, say that they really don't consume any news at all. The news is not part of their life. They're consuming information. They may be following sports, and sure, that's news, but what they're really talking about is they're not engaged in the process of political news about how our society operates. So they're not in the equation. So the question then becomes the extent to which people who do consume news are in fact affected by this stuff and what they do with it. So there's a recent Pew study of people who watch Fox News. People who watch Fox News, 86% of people in responding to this poll say that President Trump's delivering the, quote, completely right or mostly right message about the pandemic. 78% say the US has controlled the outbreak as much as it could have. And 61% say that Trump and his administration get the facts right about the coronavirus almost all or most of the time. I'm sorry if this offends anyone, but these are not issues on which rational people can legitimately disagree. This information is wrong. It is demonstrably wrong. But if you're watching Fox News, that's the way you feel about it. So there are significant subsets of American society, and I don't want to inflate the importance specifically of Fox News. It still isn't watched by that many people when you look at the national population. But those who watch it believe it deeply, and we have to assume that they're further disseminating this information to people that they know and people who trust them and their opinions.
We actually have several people on here who are commenting about fake news, or I should say, the news that gets the really heavy-handed bias. So, let's say Fox, let's say CNN, if we're going to look at them as extreme, MSNBC, let's look at those as extremes. So, you know, Sandy's asking how we should deal with the executives of this network and others who continue to report fake news. Michael's saying, how do you get people to recognize what a trusted news source is? I mean, if I watch Fox, it's my trusted news source. If I watch CNN or MSNBC, that's my trusted news source. So, you know, the days of Walter Cronkite kind of being, you know, Uncle Walter and giving you the unbiased view of the news of the day, and even he was, you know, not unbiased, it seemed to be gone. So, you know, Spencer, where do we go?
I think the key moment is when, if you are in, say, this bubble, right, where you're just watching MSNBC or you're just watching Fox News, the key moment for you is when you realize that something that you've been told on that network is demonstrably false, right? And then you have an opportunity to go out and see what other news outlets are sharing about it. I like to do A/B tests with Fox and Friends and Morning Joe all the time. And there is a huge difference. Now, they're not necessarily giving you news that's wrong, but they're emphasizing other things more than others, right? And so you can see, you know, just spend some time looking at, you know, within the same like half-hour segment, what one side will emphasize and what the other side will emphasize. And then go and watch, like, say, CBS Evening News, right? And you will see that something will fall more or less in the middle of this, right? You still have a choice, a value judgment that you're making. But if you spend some time with one channel and then look at another, right, then you're going to see just how vastly different these things are. I think the problem comes with people just really aren't that engaged, and they feel very comfortable with where they're at. And a lot of times when we encounter reaction to stories, it's because people have become engaged with, say, the Lantern for the very first time. All of a sudden now they're reading it, and this is like the first time that they've come into, you know, an experience with the news. And so that has its own set of issues as well.
It does seem, though, that we, and even in the conversation that we're having now, that if we would have had this conversation, let's say 4 years ago, but even 3 years ago, we would have had a different conversation. We would have been talking about Russian disinformation. We would have been talking about, you know, when that whole dynamic came up about foreign actors injecting narratives into our news lines that were not truthful. But now, you know, it's sort of gravitated toward our actual elected officials. And in the midst of COVID, when we are in a real crisis and we're being fed on a minute by minute basis information that is completely on opposite parameters. Like one says, you know, that we need to wear masks and this, and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are dying. And then the other side's like, nope, everything's fine. We've already cured the virus. How do you reconcile those two things when, in order to believe one or the other, you have to determine what truth is for yourself?
Well, the good news is, how about some good news for a change?
I like good news, Jeff.
Everyone
here would like good news.
The good news is that 4 years ago, we really weren't as broadly aware that we had the problem. There were isolated groups of people studying the use of disinformation by foreign actors, Russia first and foremost, journalists talking about it, national security officials talking about it, think tank folks, but there wasn't widespread appreciation that we really even had a problem. We have that appreciation today. Everybody's hearing about this. The discussion is taking place. So at least we have a starting point of awareness that there's something out there to which we should be paying attention, and maybe we ought to be doing something about it. So that is a starting point. You know, the numbers remain discouraging. The sharing of an engagement with false materials is as high or higher than it's ever been. But I would say, yeah, at least we're aware that we have a problem today, and that has started in some quarters some ideas about solutions, including straight media literacy, that it's a problem each of us has to take on as an individual, and other kinds of discussions as well about technical fixes, legal fixes, and other things we might do about it. So there is progress underway, if nothing else, in that we're aware we have a problem.
Max, you have any thoughts on the Russian disinformation and kind of what you're seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, so when like 2016 election, I was still in high school, and it's when me and a bunch of my friends were like still starting to pay more and more attention to the news, just and like growing up ourselves. um and so like just kind of entering that arena, knowing that there was that disinformation. I think what I observed is that as everyone started to pay more attention to disinformation, and including that, looking at like domestic disinformation, um, it was kind of, I viewed it as kind of along the shift of um, all the news moving to like social media platforms and away from traditional modes, just out of necessity. And in line with that, just people questioning more, because you're not on a single site. Like, say you're on the Washington Post website or even the Lantern's website, you know the institution and you might trust the institution. But if you're going through Twitter, you're starting to like having to find individual people you can trust, and people looking to reporters as well. And so as like people are analyzing that, they might be noticing noticing disinformation more often. And then just kind of that pokes the holes of light into see who domestically is doing that.
It's encouraging to hear you say that, Max, and your generation. Those of you who are digital natives as opposed to digital immigrants, I'm a digital immigrant, come better equipped with tools to filter these things. The worst offenders in sharing false information is the 60 and older generation. We're the ones who hit share before we think about it. So it really is our demographic that needs the most work and needs to think the most carefully about being disseminators, being misinformers by passing along disinformation. I do think your generation has it more built into your DNA to be able to wade your way through this. The challenge you face still is trying to decide what are trusted news sources. What are you going to trust?
And Spencer, we have several questions related to the Lantern I wanted to focus on. So welcome, Owen, a former assistant campus editor. And he's asking about the Lantern as a publication that informs a student population. How does it gain trust and credibility when the audience gets so much of its news from social media, and it's a generation that's a bit more skeptical? And then concurrent, Max, if you want to think about, he's asking what techniques that you use to develop trust with the readers. But Spencer, maybe you could get us started.
In situations where people are really engaged and they're sharing a lot of information amongst themselves, rumors can get spread. And I think the key way that the Lantern can break into that is with facts. I'm thinking maybe about 3 years ago, there was an undisclosed threat of violence against the university. There wasn't a lot of information about what this threat was supposed to be, and students were getting really worked up about it. And there was a rumor going around on Twitter. I saw at least 10 of these tweets that a person had been arrested on the Oval with a bag of guns. And it took basically one tweet from the Lantern where it says, Ohio State, OSU police, no one has been arrested on the Oval. And then that got shared. We had like 400 retweets on that. And so people will gravitate towards facts and from official sources, and they will then share that with each other too. And I think that's probably one of the best ways that we can do that. In the time since, I think there's more of an inclination to challenge factual information. And so now what you need to do is you just need to be consistent and keep sharing the facts until people are willing to accept it.
Max, what were you thinking?
Yeah, along the same line of Spencer, just like an example that I was thinking of even from just last night, in the campus area, there a bunch of police were or a large amount of Columbus police were responding to shots fired near 11th Avenue and Summit. And we went, and honestly, we just sent 2 of our reporters there after calling police dispatch to make sure there was no active threat, and just asked what happened, because we were getting calls in ourselves and getting things on social media DM to us asking questions about it, and just if you go and look at our tweets or our website, it's just the 2 sentences that we were trying to get out of. 2 people were detained, no one was injured, and there's no ongoing threat of just having that fact to keep any misinformation from spreading or even starting. But in terms of like how we get people to trust us like ourselves, something that has been a large conversation is not necessarily even being transparent about our methods, but just transparent, very open about who we are as the makeup of the Lantern staff, and being transparent on an individual level to the student body. And one thing we try to do for that is use our Twitter accounts as reporters and as editors and staff members of the Lantern to kind of build that trust with student bodies, so like they look at us as individuals, not just as a publication for facts. And an example for me that I think of is when the university first started reporting COVID-19 numbers. One thing I did was every night when I'd go update the dashboard, see all the new numbers come out, is I just did a bullet point Twitter of like a bullet point tweet of just this many new cases, this many cases total, and there's 2 more points of what those numbers mean, and then later linked to the article.
Well, I got to push back a little bit. And one of the pushbacks is going to be for you, Spencer. It comes from Joe. And he's challenging a comment that you made earlier about the facts and about the Lantern reporting facts. He says the Lantern style is often to quote students randomly about a topic in the story, such as, and he's quoting, Freddie, second year in engineering, said, and he said this is nothing more than one person's opinion, but by printing it, the suggestion is that this is a universal opinion and therefore fact. So how do we address that challenge?
Well, I guess it's the context in which quotes are presented. And so a source needs to have a relevant connection to the subject matter of the story. And so if that person comes out of nowhere, then yeah, we shouldn't have that person in the story. I often talk about the student at the end. We don't just go out and talk to somebody who's totally disconnected from the source or the subject matter, because that person doesn't really have anything relevant to add. And so the thing that you have to judge as the news reader is, does this person have something relevant to say? And then you can make your own value judgment around that. A lot of what, and I think another problem that kind of stems from that is people think that they're supposed to be persuaded by the news. And what we do and what's important for us to do is present the facts and let readers will make up their minds for themselves. Now, we may share the same conclusion, but if we're trying, there's a much bigger difference, I think, between writing something in a way that's meant to influence you, but writing in a way that's presenting the facts and here's what's happened, right? People make their own value judgments based off of what they read. The question is, are we trying to make you think a certain way, or are we just giving you the facts? And I would err towards just the facts.
Well, I'm going to push back again, and maybe Jeff, you can help me with this one. So when Max just mentioned about the COVID numbers on the Ohio State dashboard, people have contacted me and said those numbers aren't true. That's just what the university wants you to think. That they're doing all kinds of things to manipulate their data, and we see this every day, right? Joe Biden has a platform position and Donald Trump has them. They're diametrically opposed. The facts that they base their arguments on are diametrically opposed. So we present things, now it's to the point that I think, figuratively speaking, we literally could publish that we figuratively could publish the sky is blue and people would question us. So how do we cope with this, where now even the facts as they are presented by experts, which has always been the case, that's been our go-to, you get people of expertise, the Dr. Fauci's of the world, we believe them, we believe the facts they present, and now those facts are as questionable as whether or not the sky is raining sprinkles.
I love the blue sky analogy, or the blue sky comment, because by questioning whether or not the sky is blue, it really is showing how successful, and this started with the Russians, how successful they've been at getting inside our minds and making us question everything. At some point, there is, though, a threshold question that happens before you get to the news business, and that is whether or not people are going to believe what other people who are experts who have expertise say. And if you're not going to accept what the scientific community says, or what other people who are experts in whatever the field may be say about a particular topic, then there isn't a whole lot the news business can do about that. So you need to go back to a deeper level in our education or in our way of thinking that gets away from the idea that my opinions are as good as your facts. And that's something that happens, though, before it gets, not to dodge it, but that has to happen before it gets to the business of what you're consuming in the news, whether you're going to believe things that are put out by what in the old days, I guess we would have called reputable authorities, by people who have a basis in their own education and experience that we can believe. You know, climate change is a huge area where the work of authorities is being questioned by people who often really don't have very much information about the subject.
It also seems, though, and Jay Smith brings up this this question about how journalists should report a lie that's presented as fact. And I was looking on social media this morning, and actually there were a couple stories about that fact checking has failed us. That this idea of you know, when CNN has fact checking the debates or whatever it is, that it becomes this cacophony of noise that people don't even hear anymore, and there's so much of it that people can't discern lies from truth, so they stop trying. So what's journalism's responsibility here in a meaningful way? If our job is to identify lies, but people don't honestly care, what's our role? Spencer, what do you think our role is?
You know, I was just thinking, and I think it connects to the earlier question as well. I mean, the role of journalism is to question authority and hold political figures accountable. The problem is the assumptions that people are making before they even encounter the news. And so if the president tells a whopper, it's our job to say, that's not true, and then show why. If the COVID-19 numbers are faked, right, then it's our job to find out that they're fake and let everybody know. That is a key role for what it is that we need to do. So some of the questions, I think, come from an assumption that, you know, we're already co-opted. The Lantern and other news organizations are out there, and if a government agency is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, that's a good story, and people need to know. And so I think it's still, you know, we're viewing the news through our own personal filters. And so if we make a decision already that these numbers, you know, that they're a lie, well, it's going to be hard to convince you that they are when they are. If they are being faked, that would be a story that I think the Lantern would definitely want to publish, because it would be important for people to know.
This does go back to the, you know, when you write a story and you make a factual inaccuracy, you make a mistake in a story, you run a correction, right? So everyone reads the story, no one reads the correction. It's very small. And I think we're having the same dynamic here. And you know, Darren's asking how do we digest information when there's always two sides to the story? There's always an angle. There's always the potential for falsehood to be shared. Even if we find falsehood, people are going to see the falsehood much brighter and in more quantity than they will ever see the correction of that falsehood. Jeff, how do we, you know, this feels like a catch-22, but I'm praying to God you're going to tell me it's not.
You know, Spencer and Max said it well at the top. It's about transparency. And the more transparency that there is in our news business, the better off we are. You try to get it right. You know, it's a cliche about journalism being the first draft of history. When you don't get it right, you have to own that, and owning it and setting it straight in ways that are more prominent. You correctly point out the corrections too often get buried on A27, which is what we used to talk about. We talked about newspapers, rather than on the front page where the original error was made. But acknowledging error builds credibility, and building credibility, I see a number of questions scrolling through about how do I know what to trust? It's a matter of building credibility with readers, and acknowledging mistakes and correcting them is a way to build credibility. I think that's really, and that word transparency is incredibly important about our business. And you will not see that transparency if you don't see transparency, if you don't see media outlets correcting themselves, then you very probably should be thinking about looking at other media outlets. I consider making mistakes, which we all do, and owning them to be part of an honest, transparent approach. And I'm inclined to give those sources more credibility than I am those who say, you know, we're never wrong about anything. But ultimately, the balance issue, I think, comes down to having a mixed diet of media consumption. And that's easy for somebody to say who consumes a lot of media and takes time to do it. I can't imagine people saying, yeah, I'm going to watch MSNBC and then I'm going to watch Fox and then I'm going to watch CNN and I'm going to decide what to think after that. That's not the way people live their lives. But it does make sense to build into, dare I say, your social media feed, a mix of resources so you're getting different perspectives on the issue. And I put in my mix of reading international news sources. I look at the way other countries are and their media are looking at our country. There are polls out indicating that the most credible media organization in the United States among Americans is the BBC. Believe it or not, even an American news organization. Al Jazeera English is a good one to put into your mix. There are outlets, there are perspectives from elsewhere in the world that can deepen our understanding and give us a different perspective than just the right-left thing that we tend to see here in the United States. So mix it up in your news consumption. That will also frustrate the algorithms. It will start to give you a better mix of stuff if you choose to mix it up yourself.
Could we talk about censorship a little bit? Because there are a lot of claims about censorship. We certainly, there's mentioned in here that there was research done that's been continual actually that shows that better than 90% of stories about Donald Trump are negative. And of course, we have people on the right who claim that the Hunter Biden story is being censored, and stories that do not advance a narrative are censored. And you could argue that the gatekeeper function of journalism in general is a form of censorship. I mean, you take the funnel and you distill out what the gatekeepers think is important. So, you know, Max, as someone who's kind of rising up in this world, how do you view this idea of censorship and the gatekeeper function and these pieces as they come together?
Yeah. So that's something we talk and think about a lot, that feels like it conflicts with the being as transparent as possible. And even if if we're censoring disinformation, keeping that from getting into our paper as reported fact, or I guess we don't actually have a newspaper right now, our news publication as a reported fact, it feels like it conflicts with just telling everyone everything. And especially now that everyone just expects everything to be reported on and not just the most important things to be reported on, using our discretion. We use the same, like we're just going on using the same standards of the gatekeeper effect, but like I was saying, it's a conflicting thing that my generation coming up through who are wanting to work as reporters are going to have to deal with, especially after we get out of student media and dealing with, you know, some of the more institutional media organizations and older reporters as well.
Jeff, what are your thoughts on this? And another topic that people want to get into, which is a pride and joy of yours, is deep fakes and things that, the things that we really can't relieve our eyes anymore.
Well, when I think about censorship, I tend, because I study international media, to look more at what authorities and governments do by way of censorship. And it is an opportunity to remind us that as proud, rightfully, and defensive as we are of our First Amendment, our guarantee of free speech has never been from the beginning, as through interpretation, an absolute guarantee of free speech. There's a body of law, and Nicole, you know this better than anybody, a body of law and legislation that has in fact restricted certain aspects of speech and say this is not acceptable. And so the issue of censorship when it comes to disinformation, I am disinclined to go down a route of trying to stop disinformation through legal censorship. That is problematic. My mind is, however, open to some practices that other countries, democratic countries, have put in place to, for instance, limit the extent to which you can do election reporting on the eve of a vote, on the eve of the vote itself, a kind of a quiet period so that there can't be any last minute weird disinformation that would affect the outcome. Some states have taken, and other entities have taken some actions. California, I think, has banned the distribution of deepfake videos that are intended to damage a politician's reputation or to mislead voters. Deepfakes get a lot of attention. It's a sexy subject, and they can be effective. These are altered videos to show people doing or saying things that they never said. They're getting better thanks to artificial intelligence. Artificial audio programs that can listen to 10 minutes of your voice and then generate you saying anything are getting better and better. And the very latest thing that's getting more sophisticated is generated text, that we can take a little bit of something you write and then have AI generate things in your writing style. And you don't have to do anything. You can take the rest of the day off and it will generate disinformation all day long for you. While this sort of new stuff gets a lot of attention, it's not necessarily any more effective than what I would call dumb fakes. I mean, Photoshop's been around since 1990 and people have a lot of fun with that. Images have been altered ever since there's been photography. So these kinds of, as I say, dumb fakes have been around for a long time and can be very effective. We do have to think, however, about something like a deep fake, because just about forever, seeing has been believing for most people. If there were a deep fake of the President of the United States announcing the intent to launch a nuclear strike against North Korea, or an American military general in Afghanistan burning a Koran, you might be able to stop those and take them down within 5 minutes, but that could be a very dangerous 5 minutes for the world. So I don't mean to downplay the danger of manipulated media. There are technological solutions coming along, but I would anticipate that we're going to find ourselves in a cat and mouse game, as we always do with technology. Somebody will figure out how to identify deepfakes, then deepfakes will get better and we'll have to go back and figure out something else. So it's an issue that I think is here to stay, but you can do a lot even as a consumer to identify these fakes by doing really quite simple things such as reverse photo image searches, which are easy to do on Google and can often very quickly show that an image has been altered, faked, or it's being misrepresented.
And I do want to mention to everyone that we will have a list of resources that'll be sent out to you. Everyone who registered for this webinar, we're going to send a variety of ways that you'll be able to check, as Jeff was just mentioning, on reverse image search, other resources related to fake news and media literacy, and really just try to support the conversation, because I wish, an hour was enough to discuss this, but I'm afraid we could meet every day for an hour and we would still not get to the core of this. Spencer, but one thing I think we absolutely have to talk about is how students' education has been impacted by this wave moving forward of distrust. This lack of trust in that which we could trust. We don't trust history anymore to a great degree. I mean, every day it seems that there's things that have now require a new perspective. We have these questions around the journalism that was called the first draft of history. So what are we doing from a journalistic standpoint in our program specifically to try to make sure that our students are as educated as they can be to make really good, sound, responsible decisions?
Well, we reinforce, a lot of the basics of good journalism, and the things that I learned, many of the things that I learned when I was going to school in the Stone Age, right, they still apply. And so we have to, I'm trying to think of the best way to say that, because people will come into a class with certain preconceived notions, right? And what happens then is we teach a process, and we teach what it is that we need to do. And so with reporting, it's a set of critical decisions to go ahead and get all of the information that we need for a story, right? And so we also have to talk about what is all the information that you need. If we're talking about a political subject, then we're reaching out to both sides of the aisle, right? We're bringing in perspectives. If there's more than one, we make sure that both are included. if we're writing a story about somebody who is accused of something criminal, we reach out to that person to say, you know, maybe not even criminal, maybe something that's really challenging to their reputation. We reach out to that person and give them a chance to respond. And that's all basic fairness. And so when we're going over those things in a class, right, then I think that kind of approach resonates in the minds of our students. A lot of it's just common sense, but a lot of it is something that you have to put into practice. I hope is that an answer? I think that's, yeah. Okay, I'll stick with that.
And Max, maybe you can help us see too, from a student perspective, you know, how you feel that you're being, well, if you are, how you're being prepared to kind of confront the realities that we have now.
It's like, it's really going off what Spencer said there. Like, I know I came into the program preconceived notions, and just like, at least in Ohio State's journalism program, it's right off the bat of just, it's this process. And one thing that I remember Nicole saying on like our first day of class about in terms of writing stories is go into the story with you knowing nothing. Or go in the when you go into the story, you know nothing. So you're not bringing in any of that outside bias. I think Ohio State does a really good job of Ohio State does a really good job of teaching that separation, and especially in the current climate, and with our readership being, or our target readership being students and the younger generation that's going to be questioning more, and with all the events of the past year, 8 months, at least everyone here right now is really getting the crash course and course corrections as we go along. I know like every time something new comes up, Spencer keeps saying, you know, it's a learning experience, and we really are learning. I think the last time something really big came up and we talked to Spencer about it, he sat there and said, I want to say it's a learning experience, but I think you guys are all just going to get mad at me for saying that again.
Well, they are learning experiences.
I'm not arguing that.
This year has been filled. I mean, 2020 is I think a part of this is my fault, because around this time last year I was saying, you know, we just don't have enough news.
Well, and I think it's a totally great point, and I think that we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is on Tuesday, a big news event's going to happen. We're going to have plenty of news. And Jeff, you know, we have question after question here of, you know, Kathy says, I'm at the point I don't believe any media outlet. What's your advice on getting the truth? And, you know, Isabel's asking about fake news spread about President Trump and Vice President Biden. They've been accused of so many things. We have other, I saw a question in here that, you know, things have been hidden about Joe Biden while they've been fully exposed about Donald Trump. You know, this is arguably going to be the most tense and potentially vitriolic election day that we will have. We may not have answers. You know, when the process is working its way through and people don't believe what's being reported about the process, what's the potential for democracy to survive that?
So take a deep breath, everybody. You're going to see, if you think we have disinformation problems in the run-up to the election, wait until you see what's going to start on Tuesday evening, as we'll be seeing reports, maybe true, maybe false, of ballot box stuffing, or the, you know, the things President Trump's expressed concerns about mail-in ballots and the like. So one of the most important things about being a responsible news consumer today and avoiding falling prey to disinformation is to take your time, slow down, look and see. And in one of the materials that we include that we'll make available to participants in the webinar, there's an 8-step how to recognize a fake news story. And an important element that's included there is look at the sources for information. So when it comes to being election night, who's being quoted as being a source of information? Is it some guy standing outside a polling station, given his point of view on how there was cheating taking place there? No, look for the quote to come from the Board of Elections, from the state authorities and others. So you have to be disciplined as a news consumer and caution others to take it easy and let things develop. And because It's never clear who's won the election really the night of the election. These, the official results come out when they come out, and it will be particularly difficult next week. And everybody will be throwing their kitchen sink, the disinformationalists from all around the world, including the Russians, including the Iranians, who are bigger players in this game than they were, possibly including the Chinese, to try to confuse us. So, the government hasn't done a great deal about disinformation, and that's unfortunate on the one hand because we'd like them to protect us, but it's fortunate on another hand because it means they haven't imposed censorship. And if they're not going to impose censorship, if our government's not going to, and I don't think we really want them to do that, the responsibility ultimately does fall to us as individuals. So take a deep breath. Don't get overexcited on election evening, and be careful about what you're seeing in the sources and about sharing it with others. That's the best we can do.
And moving forward, I wish that we would say on Tuesday that whatever was going to happen would happen, and then this would all evaporate, and we would no longer have disinformation, and we would no longer have, this partisanship that seems to be ripping apart our quest for facts and truth. And the idea now that truth has become so subjective, I think, is the most dangerous space that we occupy. So if we're looking forward and we could give advice to people, maybe each one of you could offer something, and Max, maybe you would start. How do we move forward in a meaningful way so that we move toward progress and not being mired where we are now?
I think one of the most important things, and especially in light of next week, is just finding or introducing the accounts and people to your social media and whatever information feeds you get that you can trust. So in the example, like next Tuesday on election night, don't just go doom scrolling through Twitter or TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. Maybe create a group on Twitter of the reporters or public officials that you know and trust, or that you can trust, or news organizations that you can trust. But in the long term, I think that really needs to, as journalism students here, we are we make sure we're here to get indoctrinated into news media. But I think in terms of the population as a whole, it's really going to take a change in the education of what education around media looks like at younger levels. So in information literacy classes in middle school, don't necessarily send your students into the internet to look for facts, maybe just send them into the internet, look for information, and then moving forward, how to analyze that information or how to figure out if that is factual or not. I think a lot of it is having to change the culture around how we are getting information, teaching children how to interpret information they get off the internet.
No doubt. Spencer, what's your advice? Thank you, Max.
If a statement comes over on election night that seems outrageous or is making a bold claim, look at the facts that underlie that claim and where they come from. If somebody is saying this is happening, how do they back that up? And if it won't take too long to unravel the fact, if it is false or misleading, it won't take that long to unravel that.
Jeff, you going to save us here? What's our
practice? The buzzword is practice informational distancing. When you feel yourself reacting to a piece of content that you've encountered online, step away from it. Physically step away from it. Step away from it in a temporal sense. Give it some time before you share it. Just real quickly, though, on a point Max raised, I think is really important. There are countries around the world that have made it a real priority in their education system to begin media literacy instruction in elementary school. And these are countries on the front lines against Russian disinformation, first and foremost, such as Finland. It's wonderful to see some school systems, including in the Columbus area, beginning to include more media literacy. I really think we have to build that in right from the beginning of when kids start to consume information to help give them the tools and the techniques to protect themselves from disinformation.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I'm going to unfortunately draw this panel to a close. We all give the a distant applause for just such a outstanding conversation. I'm so grateful to you. I know that I speak for everyone. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions. Obviously, we have way more to talk about. Maybe we can schedule another one of these. But we are available if you'd like to reach out to us by email. We'd love to hear from you. I also would love to see you. I think we'd all love to see you November 17th. We're going to have an incredibly, just the session I'm looking forward to the most, although I love this one, where we will welcome home Len Downey of the Washington Post, who will come back and talk with us about the future of journalism, including talking about his new book and his experiences at the Lantern and how they prepared him to be an editor at the Washington Post, one of the editors that was involved in Watergate, and a variety of other experiences that when we listened to him the other night, we had a chance to speak with him. It was just extraordinary for all of us on our staff. So we thank you so much for being here. We are so grateful that you were able to spend this hour with us. Please be discerning in your news consumption. Please know that the facts are out there and you need to seek them. And we are here to help. So we hope to hear from you. We hope to see you again. And everybody, please mask up and be safe. Thank you.